On today's episode of Locked On Wild, 3 things to take away from the loss to the Seattle Kraken, including John Hynes' thoughts on defensive breakdowns, Ryan Hartman stepping up to fill Joel Eriksson Ek's shoes, and circumstances taking control of the game.
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we dive into 3 things that we learned from John Hynes' post-game comments after last night's 5-4 shootout loss to the Seattle Kraken. We'll talk Ryan Hartman. We will talk about the Jonas Brodin penalty, because turns out the official said a couple of things to Jonas Brodin after the fact. And we'll talk about, John Hynes' thoughts on the defense as well. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, since 2021, credentialed Wild media member. And see, this is why I wanted to do these after games, because in this first segment, This is part of the process, because I, as many of you know, those that watched the postcast last night, I threw a large amount of the blame Marc-Andre Fleury's way for how things went. And, statistically, you look at the numbers courtesy of moneypuck.com, Fleury had an expected goals against of 2.93, gave up 4. So his goals saved above expected in negative territory does mean that there is some that should go his way. But we talked about it on the Jordan Eberle power play goal, about how that was a defensive breakdown that led to Eberle basically being able to tiptoe his way behind Fleury and out of his sight line. But here's what John Hynes had to say about a couple of the other goals, in particular the open slot shots that led to opportunities for the Seattle Kraken.
Yeah, overall, the locker room is pretty positive. I mean, are you, for the most part, other than the goals against and giving up the deficits, I mean, are you happy with the way that you guys played?
Yeah, I think when you look at it, I think there were lots of components of our game that were really solid. I think on a couple of the goals, we had some breakdowns, like that slot shot, that when the guy was wide open, that was just a, kind of a misread on the play. Unfortunately, I think sometimes those things happen when you're coming out of camp and you get things. We had 2 point blank slot shots. Like, those are ones where the coverage has to be automatic, probably for both teams. But I like, this, I liked a lot more about our game and our mindset, the details of our game, than in the first one. So, we gotta build off it. We didn't get the 2, we got the 1. You got to keep getting wins, you got to keep getting points. But all that's going to be driven by, I think, the mindset, I think the style of game, and I saw lots of good tonight that I think we're going to be able to move forward with.
So that is interesting, because I'm going to look at what Money Puck has to say about those particular shots. So for one, the McCann goal, Money Puck gave that a 6% chance of being a goal from that spot, from 41.8 feet. And that was a power play goal with 3:26 remaining. There was a 71.5% chance of being on net, and McCann was able to blast that one in. And the other one from the other faceoff circle was the Cartier goal, and that had a 5% chance of being a goal as well, from 27.8 feet, 75.6% chance of being on net. But I think the key point that John Hynes makes here is that defensively, you can't allow guys to get to those spots and get comfortable and get shots off, because they are able to obviously put more on the shots and are able to aim them a little better than if they're being rushed, if they're being pushed. And so goaltending and defense is always going to be a give and take. Like, it's always going to be a dance between the two units as to who is truly at fault for a goal being scored. And the mindset of, well, the goalie is ultimately the one that has to make the save is certainly one half of that. And so it is interesting that Hynes was more likely to put that on the defenseman than he was on the goalies. Now, there were 4 different goals scored throughout the duration of the game, and a couple of the others came right in front. Now, you've got the Eberle goal in which Fleury couldn't find it, then tried to pin it as he was pushed into the net. And so that is another one too, where, that's one that I probably put on Fleury specifically, because if you are the goalie, you got to find that puck. Now, that scrum did go quite a bit of time to where maybe I'm sure there was some frustration that play wasn't stopped. But then again, on the other hand, if the puck is loose, there's no reason to stop the play. And so that's one. And then defensively, especially on the Eberle power play goal where he just gets completely lost. That's one that I think John Hynes keyed in on particularly, as to that being a defensive breakdown and a need to really make sure that when you're on the penalty kill, that you have accounted for all of the players that are on the ice, because you've only got 4 guys out there. They have 5. And so if you're just saying, all right, everybody pick one guy, there's still one guy that is out there and is uncounted for. And so it's frustrating, because on one hand, you did some really good things offensively, but it feels like, there just needs to be better communication, I think, defensively, and there need to be saves made ultimately in net. And so, do you 51%, 49% it in terms of which one is more of a concern? I think both units just need to, shore things up a little bit. And Philip Gustafsson did a good job against Columbus. Had he started last night, would the game have ended up differently? Who's to say? But at the end of the day, you look at it, and Seattle had a 2.94 expected goals for the entire game, and the Wild had 2.84. So both teams were pretty even in that regard. But something that we'll talk about here in the third segment, Seattle just kept answering. And that's how you keep yourself in games and put yourself in the potential spot to win a game, is by just continuing to get up off the mat and continuing to answer. And every time the Wilds got back out in front, Seattle just was able to make something happen to get the game back in their favor, at least tie it up. The Wild never did trail in last night's game up until the final shootout goal. So, look, we know that Marc-Andre Fleury is on the older side. He's 39 right now. This is his final season. But this was the worry, I think, with bringing him back for one more season, is how often are you going to see nights like this where the reaction time, on those slot shots especially, those are lasers. Seattle just lasered both of those in. Again, they were mostly untested, and so you're able to really get good looks from there. But that's one of the things with getting older as a goalie, especially, is the reaction time and the ability to move in and out of the crease, that starts to really take a hit. And so it is just one game. It's one start for Fleury. This will not be the last time we see him this year. And so it's just a matter of communicating and looking at some of the things that led to the Kraken goals and just trying to shore those up and just trying to put yourself in better spots to make the saves. He had plenty of good saves in last night's game. It's just this has kind of been the MO over the last couple of seasons. Is there are a handful of really good saves. There are others where you look and you're like, boy, it feels like that's one that a goalie should make the save on. But then the defense doesn't do as many favors as they could either. And so it's just all this kind of concoction of things that lead to coming up on the wrong end of a game like this. It's all stuff that's just going to need to be it's going to need to be tightened up and shored up as the season progresses. But we'll talk more about that because John Hynes had a very interesting phrase that he used to talk about kind of how this game unfolded, which I think was directly to avoid any potential discipline. So we'll talk about that. But next up, we're going to take a look at the theme of stepping up because Joel Eriksson Ek was injured in the game, obviously, and the Wild needed somebody to step up and fill his shoes. And a name that you probably would expect did just that. So we'll talk about the night that Ryan Hartman had for the Minnesota Wild as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Hims. Your sex life is important, but your schedule sometimes may get a little busy. You don't have the time to go to the doctor's office to get treated for ED. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot outside your door. Hims provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints and Viagra and Cialis, and they're generics for up to 95% cheaper. The process is 100% online, so there's no need for those uncomfortable doctor visits. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The products mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We'll have another episode coming for you just before puck drop here today as we'll take a look at the Jets game. We've got roster information for you. Waiting on that one to see because I kind of get the hint that there's going to be more than one player out of the lineup in today's game. So we'll try to get full confirmation of that, as well as checking in with Connor Rabchuk of Winnipeg Sports Talk to talk a little bit about the Winnipeg Jets heading into today's game. So we'll be dropping that at about 4:30 here today to get you right up to puck drop of today's game against the Winnipeg Jets. Now, let's continue our three things from the game against the Seattle Kraken with the notion of stepping up. Because obviously, when Joel Eriksson Ek got injured, that created a bit of a line jumble, and it led to some different line combinations for the Wild down the stretch, but also a couple of players who were asked to step in to different roles to try to help the team win. And so let's hear John Hynes' comments about Ryan Hartman in particular, but there were other players that did a good job of it too.
Hartman's versatility, you could elevate him in that role. He can deliver at the time of the goal.
Yeah, it was. I mean, that's what you need. You need guys to be able to. That was one of the games where a couple of the guys that are expected to produce points did, and then you're in a tighter game, and you need some secondary scoring. You need other guys to be able to contribute, and I thought we were able to do that.
So Hartman was the main one because obviously he slotted in with Matt Boldy and Marcus Johansson. Ended up getting honestly an unreal feed from Matt Boldy, a no-look behind the back pass to right out in front of the net, which led to Hartman being able to score what was the go-ahead goal at the time to make it 4-3. But let's give some props to Marat Huznadinov as well, because with Eriksson Ek out of the lineup, he got bumped up to the third line, and then we saw Freddie Gaudreau slide over to take the center spot on the fourth line, and Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Boldy basically were double shifted from that point to the rest of the game. But Huznadinov got a couple of looks with Kaprizov and Boldy as well, and his speed and his just tenacity out there has really shown through over the first couple of games of the season. And this is why I think this was going to be something that differed from what happened to this team last year. Now, I don't get the sense, unless this is like a broken jaw situation for Joel Eriksson Ek, I don't think he's going to miss more than the Winnipeg game. It seems pretty evident that it is a broken nose, but I don't get the sense that he's going to miss a ton of time. And so we'll talk more in our second episode today about what the lineup changes look like. But the center depth is going to allow the Wild to at least kind of offset this in the short term, because you've got Ryan Hartman, who I would imagine is going to take that second line center spot. You can move Huznadinov up to the third line, and then you can fill in whatever you need on that fourth line, because you've got some guys that are proven NHLers that have played at the NHL level before. Travis Boyd was called up by the Wild on emergency loan for the Jets game today. But he is, I don't get the sense that he's going to be brought up and slotted in as a second line wing. Like, he's a guy that can come in and he can play a fourth line role, to where if there are multiple players out of the lineup today, you can put Liam Ogren higher in the lineup. The Wild have options to where they don't need to say, okay, Liam Ogren, we're going to put you on the fourth line and you're just going to fill that spot on the roster. They have guys they can do that with. And because this is an emergency loan situation, I think that means that once the injured players are healthy again, I think that means that they can just send Boyd right back down without having to do the waiver thing. I could be wrong on that, but my main point is that it feels like the depth is better this year, and it's going to allow this team to weather short-term storms. Now, if you lose somebody for long-term that is a key piece, obviously that's hard to replace. But in-game and in leading up to today's game, it's just going to be a situation that guys need to step up and fill in critical spots. Now, face-off wise last night, the Wild didn't have a particularly good night in the dot, but it was weird because we've seen it happen so many times that the Wilds don't win a ton of faceoffs, but they still find themselves winning the game. And so it's not something that I worry about as much, but the thing that I worry about is replicating the scoring. If Joel Eriksson Ek is out, you're losing a perennial 30-goal scorer. Ryan Hartman stepped in and put the team ahead with the goal late. And so he did his job there. You just have to find a way to get better defense / goaltending to put that one away. A lot of the reason that the game kind of teetered was, as John Hynes puts it, circumstances beyond their control. And so let's talk about that phrase to finish as we recap last night's loss to the Seattle Kraken 5-4 in a shootout. We'll finish with some final thoughts after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. It's all lined up neat and tidy, so you don't need 90 billion tabs open like I have when I'm tracking my fantasy team, which, by the way, 4 players injured in my lineup today before they recorded any points. So if you want to know how my team's doing today, having a great time. But FanDuel can help you have a much better time because you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Doesn't even have to be a win. You could pick the Winnipeg Jets today, and regardless of if they win or lose, you get $200 in bonus bets. So head to FanDuel.com right now to take advantage of this great offer. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Reminder, we got another show coming up for you here at around 4:30 to recap, or to preview, I should say, the game against the Winnipeg Jets. We'll talk about the lineup decisions, roster moves, and we'll get some intel on the Jets heading into this matchup. But let's just finish by talking about the notion of circumstances beyond the Minnesota Wild's control, which I feel like was a way that John Hynes avoided any potential discipline for talking about the officiating.
Second game of the year, but this is an important lesson about putting teams away when you get momentum and you creating some distance when you can.
I would probably say in a different situation, I think there was some things that were uncontrollable on our part that did swing the game, to Mike's point. And then, I'd probably say that the one point is probably that, you take the penalty and then they score the 6-on-5 goal when it's later. I think there's some teaching involved in that, but I wouldn't say that, I thought we were pretty thorough, to be honest. I think, our line changes were good. We didn't give up odd man rushes. We made them earn their chances. There were a couple things, probably that changed the difference in the deficits tonight was probably circumstances of the game. And then the second one was, can we handle, that situation when we took the penalty a little bit better? So to me, when I look at it, it could be different things if you're not managing the puck and you're giving up rushes and you have loose coverage and things like that later in the game to hold it. I didn't think that was the case tonight.
And that's interesting that he phrases it that way, because it does feel like, he's keying in on that Brodin penalty especially. And it's interesting too, if you go back and listen to the post-game comments from the players, Jonas Brodin said the official actually apologized to him after the fact and said that he was looking at the wrong stick, and that's why he called the trip. Which it was the legs that caused the trip. It was Montour's legs that tripped Brodin that led to Brodin being called for the tripping penalty. But Hynes brings up a good point here, and this is the one that I think, as much as we point to a play like that and say, that should never be called, that shouldn't be a penalty on the Minnesota Wild, and it shouldn't. At the end of the day, you still have to find a way to get that kill. Like, you can't just throw your hands in the air and say, that should never have been called on us. What are we supposed to do? Like, there are things that happen to teams up and down the NHL that they don't feel like are the correct calls. At the end of the day, you still got to play. You're not going to file a grievance and put the game under protest or anything like that. So you got to find a way to get it done. And again, I keep coming back to the offense continued to find ways to do it. defensively, and this does include the forwards. This was pointed out in the postcast last night and in the comments as well. Defense does include the forwards to be able to help out as well, and that is 100% correct. It's a collective team defense, collective team offense. And so last night, I thought the offense just continued to put the team in position to win. The defense and the goaltending did not match it. And so, I think the big circumstance beyond the Wild's control is just that swing. You go from having Joel Eriksson Ek get elbowed in the face and nothing called to then Brodin getting called for a trip that wasn't his fault. That's quite a swing right there. But as we talk about, and this is why I just really don't ever dive down the officiating road, is because officiating discrepancies are maybe 3 or 4 plays out of the entire scope of the game. And you've got others, Kirill Kaprizov nearly had a tap-in goal right before the horn sounded. If you're a second quicker on that, or a split second quicker, there's another goal for you. There were some opportunities right in front of the net that were not closed on by the Minnesota Wild. It's a matter of taking your opportunities and finishing them, regardless of what happens, to put yourself in position to come away with the win. And so, yes, we can say that shouldn't have been a penalty on Brodin, or that the elbow to Ek should have been called. But then you've got 3 plays there. You get 3 different plays in overtime. You've got Kirill's looking overtime, Boldy's looking overtime, and Rossi's looking overtime. If you close on one of those, it's a moot point, because you got both points. You won the game, and you can say, we won despite these circumstances. There just are so many different key plays during a game that can factor in to what happens, that, pointing to those is just pushing some of the other stuff to the side that had equal, if not more, impact on what happened in the game. And so I like the fact that Hynes was more quick to point out some of those miscues and some of those penalty kill things. But, on the other hand, hey, guess what? Penalty kill is not a new problem. Like, this has been a problem for this team for the better part of the last 5 years, since they really had like a dynamic, good penalty kill. It just continues to be it just continues to be an area that just does not seem to really hit its mark. We're 2 games in, and so there's certainly plenty of time for that to improve, but that is a scab that teams are going to continue to pick at if it shows that it's still there. If you get that thing to heal fully and to look like a competent penalty kill unit out there, then that's not going to be something that teams really key in on as much. Now, I thought the penalty kill did some good things at points, but again, a penalty kill unit's success is measured on goals given up. And you can defend a power play for 1 minute and 58 seconds and look fantastic, and one breakdown leads to a goal, and it's still a failure. And that's just the metric by how that unit and how the power play, how they're measured, is by the goals that they either score if you're on the power play, or that you give up if you're on the penalty kill. Quick side on the power play, the Wild had early on in the game, they had a power play in which they controlled the offensive zone for basically 2 full minutes, had really good looks, puck movement all over the place, everything you would want from a power play, but they didn't score. They weren't able to get the goal to put the icing on the cake. And so it's the same thing. It's like you can do all these really good things, but at the end of the day, if you don't, if you're not scoring power play goals, if you're not preventing goals on the penalty kill, then the success gets pulled lower by those units. And so at the end of the day, 3 out of 4 points in the first 2 games of the season is still pretty good. I would just much rather have had 4, because I still hold to the fact that I just don't think that game should ever have gotten to overtime. And if you find a way to close that game out in regulation, then you're 2-0 heading into Winnipeg. You've got some concerns, obviously, with Joel Eriksson Ek, but hockey is weird. Chicago took care of business against Edmonton last night. Figure that out. The Blues lost to the San Jose Sharks. Hockey's weird. It's a weird sport. It feels like anything can happen on any given night. And so, 2 games in, there are some things that we like. Some things need to be fine-tuned. But honestly, it's just going to be fun for me, I think, to check some of my thoughts on the game compared to what we hear from John Hynes after, because, putting more emphasis on the defense as opposed to the goaltending, that's a spot where our tunes differed a little bit. But he does bring up some good points. So I hope you enjoyed this 3 things recap for last night's game against the Seattle Kraken. We'll have one for you tomorrow morning as well after tonight's game against the Winnipeg Jets. And we'll have a pregame for you coming up here shortly at about 4:30 before puck drop, getting some thoughts on the Jets as well as the lineup. So be looking for all of that here to get you through to the start of tonight's game against Winnipeg. Make sure to hit that subscribe button if you have not already, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We have new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.